The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maylene organized the stack of papers on her desk, for the third time that morning. She had a system. Invoices to the right, expense reports to the left, and anything requiring her supervisor's signature in a neat folder at the center. 26 minutes until lunch break, she knew without checking her watch. Outside her gray cubicle, the accounting department of Wellington and Partners buzzed with the usual Monday energy. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, and laughter occasionally burst from the break room where the younger staff gathered to share weekend stories. Maylene heard it all but remained focused on her spreadsheets. "Did you hear about the holiday party this Friday?" asked Tricia, popping her head over the cubicle wall so suddenly that Maylene's hand jerked, creating a small ink spot on her notepad. "Yes, I received the email," Maylene replied quietly, reaching for a tissue to blot the ink. "Are you coming this year?" "You skipped the last two," Tricia said, resting her elbows on the cubicle divider. Her bangles jingled as she adjusted her bright red glasses. Maylene hesitated. The annual holiday parties were loud affairs with too much alcohol and forced cheer. Last year she had claimed a migraine. The year before, a sick relative. But this year she had run out of believable excuses. "I think I will attend briefly," she said, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fantastic," Tricia beamed, apparently counting this lukewarm response as a victory. "It's at the Grand Windsor Hotel downtown. They have this gorgeous ballroom. Rumor has it the CEO splurged this year because we hit our targets." Maylene nodded politely, waiting for Tricia to retreat back to her own workspace. When she finally did, Maylene released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. At 43, Maylene felt invisible among her coworkers. Not in a painful way, there was actually comfort in it. She had worked at the firm for 7 years, arriving each day at precisely 8:45 a.m., bringing her lunch in the same blue container, and leaving at 5:30 p.m. Her performance reviews consistently rated her as highly efficient and detail-oriented. No one complained about her work, and she complained about nothing. What her colleagues didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that Maylene's life hadn't always been defined by spreadsheets and accounting codes. There had been color once, and passion, and music that filled not just rooms but entire concert halls. That evening, Maylene unlocked the door to her small apartment on the east side of the city. It was a one-bedroom unit in a quiet building populated mostly by elderly residents and busy professionals who, like her, valued peace over socializing. She slipped off her sensible black shoes and hung her coat in the narrow closet by the door. The apartment was clean and sparsely decorated. A small dining table with 2 chairs sat near the kitchenette. The living room held a comfortable but worn sofa, a coffee table stacked with library books, and a television she rarely turned on. Nothing about the space suggested anything remarkable about its occupant, except for one thing. In the corner of the living room, covered with a dark blue cloth, stood a digital piano. Not an expensive one, not like the gleaming grand pianos she had once played, but a decent instrument with weighted keys that could almost feel like the real thing. Maylene walked past it as she did most evenings, heading straight to the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner of vegetable soup and toast. She ate while reading a mystery novel, washed her dishes, and prepared her lunch for the next day. Only after her evening routine was complete did she approach the piano. She didn't uncover it, not tonight. Instead, she simply rested her hand on the cloth, feeling the outline of the keys beneath. "Not today," she whispered to herself, turning away. In bed that night, Maylene stared at the ceiling, listening to the occasional car passing on the street below. The holiday party loomed in her mind. She could still call in sick. A winter cold would surprise no one. Yet something held her back from taking the easy escape route. Morning arrived with gray skies and the threat of snow. Maylene dressed carefully in her usual attire, dark slacks, a navy blue blouse, and a cardigan. She applied minimal makeup and pulled her shoulder-length black hair into a simple, low ponytail. Looking in the mirror, she practiced a pleasant, neutral expression. It was the face of someone who could blend into any crowd, someone who would never draw attention. The week passed quickly, filled with end-of-year reports and tax preparations. Before she knew it, Friday evening had arrived, and with it, the holiday party. The Grand Windsor Hotel was indeed impressive, with marble floors in the lobby and crystal chandeliers that scattered light like stars. Mei Lin arrived 30 minutes after the party's start time, late enough not to be among the first awkward attendees, but early enough to be considered present. The ballroom was decorated with silver and blue ornaments, and a massive Christmas tree stood in one corner, draped in twinkling lights. Catering staff circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne flutes. A bar had been set up along one wall, already crowded with her more outgoing colleagues. And there, on a small stage at the far end of the room, stood a baby grand piano, its polished black surface reflecting the party lights. Mei Lin's heart skipped a beat at the sight of it. She quickly looked away and found a quiet spot near a window where she could observe without participating. She accepted a glass of water from a passing server and sipped it slowly, counting the minutes until she could reasonably leave without seeming rude. "I don't think I've ever seen you at one of these things before," said a voice beside her. Mei Lin turned to find Lee from the IT department standing there with a plate of food. She had worked with him occasionally when her computer had issues, a quiet man who explained technical problems without making her feel foolish for not understanding. "I came last year," Mei Lin lied gently, "but only for a short while." "Smart move," Lee said, nodding toward the dance floor where their manager was attempting some kind of spinning move that threatened the safety of everyone within a 3-foot radius. "Some things you can't unsee," Mei Lin laughed despite herself, a small genuine chuckle that surprised her. "Very true." "The food's good, though," Lee added, offering her a stuffed mushroom from his plate. She accepted it with a small thank you. Their brief conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they watched their co-workers become increasingly animated as the evening progressed. Across the room, Mei Lin noticed a group of junior accountants huddled near the bar. Their leader was Ryan, a recent business school graduate with a loud voice and louder opinions. He kept glancing in her direction and then turning back to his friends with a smirk. Mei Lin felt a familiar discomfort settle in her stomach. The company president took to the small stage then, tapping a microphone to get everyone's attention. He gave a predictable speech about record profits and team spirit, congratulated 3 employees on their promotions, and reminded everyone about the Secret Santa gift exchange happening after dinner. As the crowd dispersed toward the buffet tables, Mei Lin considered making her exit. She had shown her face, exchanged pleasantries with a few colleagues, and even the most dedicated office gossips would have to admit she had attended. But as she placed her water glass on a nearby table, she noticed Ryan and his group approaching her with purpose. "Hey, Lin," Ryan called out, his voice carrying across the now quieter room. Several heads turned in their direction. "I didn't know you were going to grace us with your presence tonight." His tone made it clear this wasn't a genuine welcome. Behind him, 2 younger women from accounts receivable giggled, their cheeks flushed from alcohol. "Good evening, Ryan," Mei Lin replied evenly, wishing she had left 5 minutes earlier. "We were just talking about hidden talents," Ryan continued, moving closer. His expensive cologne was overwhelming. "Sandy here used to be a cheerleader. Devin played college basketball. And I was wondering..." He paused dramatically, glancing back at his friends. "What hidden talents does the mysterious Mei Lin have?" Mei Lin felt her chest tighten. This wasn't friendly curiosity, it was the setup to some joke at her expense. She'd experienced enough of these moments in her life to recognize them instantly. "I'm not very mysterious," she said softly, "and I should probably be going..." Wait, Ryan interrupted, placing himself between Mei Lin and the exit. "I just realized something amazing. We have this beautiful piano here and no one's playing it." He gestured grandly toward the baby grand. "Maybe you could entertain us?" The suggestion was met with poorly concealed snickers from his friends. The trap was obvious. Put the quiet, awkward woman in the spotlight and watch her fumble. "I don't play," Mei Lin said automatically, the lie familiar on her tongue after so many years. "Oh, come on," Ryan insisted, his voice louder now, drawing more attention. "Everyone can play something. Chopsticks? Heart and soul? Or are you too good for that kind of thing?" Mei Lin felt heat rising to her face as more colleagues turned to watch the exchange. The room seemed to shrink around her, the air becoming thin. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lee step forward, likely to intervene, but something stopped him. It was Mei Lin herself. Instead of shrinking away as everyone expected, she straightened her shoulders and looked Ryan directly in the eyes. "Actually," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "perhaps I will play something." Surprise flashed across Ryan's face, quickly replaced by anticipation for what he assumed would be an embarrassing spectacle. He stepped aside with an exaggerated bow. "The stage is yours." Conversations around the room died down as Mei Lin made her way to the piano. She could feel every eye on her, could practically hear the thoughts. What is she doing? This will be a disaster. Poor woman doesn't know when to back down. The piano bench was cold beneath her as she sat down. Mei Lin stared at the keys, ivory and ebony, familiar yet distant, like the face of an old friend she hadn't seen in decades. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. In that brief darkness, she wasn't in the Grand Windsor Hotel surrounded by judgmental co-workers. She was 18 again, sitting at a concert grand in Shanghai, her teacher nodding encouragingly from the wings, her future bright and limitless as her fingers prepared to bring music into the world. The moment Mei Lin's fingers touched the keys, something awakened inside her. A memory, a feeling, a part of herself she had locked away for so long that she had almost convinced herself it no longer existed. She played a single note, a G, clear and perfect. It rang through the ballroom with a depth that silenced every whisper. Time seemed to slow as her fingers found the next notes, then the next, flowing into Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. She had played it countless times in another life, but never like this, never after years of silence, never with such raw emotion pouring from her hands. Ryan's smug smile froze on his face. Around him, conversation died as heads turned toward the piano. The gentle melody filled the room, building gradually in complexity. Mei Lin's body swayed slightly as her fingers danced across the keys with practiced precision that no amateur could possibly possess. "What the hell?" whispered Devon to Ryan, his eyes wide. "You said she was just some boring accountant." Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. The music had stolen his voice just as surely as it had captured the attention of every person in the ballroom. At the piano, Mei Lin was transforming. The careful mask she wore daily, the plain, forgettable woman who blended into the background of office life, slipped away with each measure. Her posture changed, her expression softened, and even her breathing fell into rhythm with the piece. She was no longer playing the music. She had become the music. The serving staff paused with their trays. The bartenders stopped pouring drinks. Even the hotel manager, who had been checking his watch impatiently, now stood transfixed near the doorway. As the piece reached its first dramatic crescendo, Mei Lin's fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The music swelled, filling every corner of the room, washing over the stunned audience in waves of emotion, longing, passion, sorrow, and hope, all intertwined in Chopin's masterpiece. Lee watched from his spot near the window, a smile slowly spreading across his face. Unlike the others, his expression held no shock, only appreciation and a hint of vindication, as if he had always suspected there was more to Mei Lin than others could see. In the back of the room, Tricia from Human Resources pulled out her phone and began recording. Next to her, the company president stood with his mouth slightly open, his half-eaten canapé forgotten in his hand. The piece continued, building in intensity. Mei Lin had closed her eyes now, letting muscle memory and emotion guide her through the familiar landscape of the music. Her fingers struck the keys with confidence, drawing forth sounds that seemed impossible from the hotel's modest piano. She had played on better instruments, certainly, but tonight it didn't matter. Tonight she could have made music on a toy piano and it would have sounded just as magical. When Mei Lin reached the middle section of the ballade, with its quieter, more reflective passage, she finally allowed herself to look up. What she saw nearly made her fingers stumble. Almost every person in the room was watching her, their faces showing various degrees of astonishment. Some had moved closer to the piano, drawn by the music like moths to flame. Ryan stood frozen in place, his expression unreadable. Beside him, one of the young women who had been giggling earlier now had tears streaming down her face, moved by the beauty of the performance. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Mei Lin hadn't performed in public for so many years. She had carefully constructed a life of invisibility, of quiet competence that never drew attention. And now, with one impulsive decision, she had shattered that protective shell. But the music wouldn't let her retreat. Chopin's notes pulled her forward, demanding to be played, demanding to be heard. And so she continued. her fingers finding their way through the difficult passages with a skill that spoke of thousands of hours of practice and natural talent that couldn't be extinguished, even after years of neglect. As she played the final section, with its stormy octaves and passionate intensity, Mei-Lin felt something breaking free inside her chest, something that had been caged for far too long. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing instead on giving herself completely to these final moments. The last notes echoed through the ballroom, hanging in the air like a question. And then silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the applause began. Hesitant at first, then building into thunderous appreciation that seemed to shake the chandeliers. People were standing, their faces alight with the special joy that comes from witnessing unexpected beauty. Mei-Lin remained seated at the piano, her hands now resting in her lap, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it above their applause. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by what she had just done and by the response it had generated. The company president was the first to approach the piano, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. "That was extraordinary. Ms. Lin," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Absolutely extraordinary. I had no idea we had such talent in our accounting department." Mei-Lin managed a small nod, still too overcome to speak. More colleagues were approaching now, their earlier indifference replaced by eager curiosity. "Where did you learn to play like that? Have you performed professionally? Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" The questions came rapid fire, each one chipping away at the wall of privacy Mei-Lin had built around herself. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be for years. Part of her wanted to flee, to run back to the safety of her quiet apartment and pretend this night had never happened. Ryan pushed his way through the crowd, his face flushed. For a moment, Mei-Lin braced herself for some cutting remark, an attempt to save face after his joke had so thoroughly backfired. But when he reached the piano, his expression was uncharacteristically humble. "That was, I've never heard anything like that in person," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I owe you an apology. I was being a jerk and you just..." He gestured helplessly at the piano. "You completely showed me up in the best possible way." Before Mei-Lin could respond, Trisha from HR appeared at her side. "I got the whole thing on video," she said excitedly, waving her phone. "This is going on our company website, with your permission, of course. People need to see this." The thought of her performance being shared online made Mei-Lin's stomach tighten with anxiety. "I don't think," she began, but was interrupted by the arrival of more colleagues, all eager to express their amazement. Lee somehow managed to navigate through the crowd, appearing at Mei-Lin's other side with a glass of water. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly, placing it on the piano. Then, as the others continued to exclaim over her performance, he added, "You don't have to answer all their questions right now, or ever if you don't want to." Grateful for his understanding, Mei-Lin took a sip of water. The cool liquid helped center her, bringing her back to herself after the emotional journey of the music. "Thank you," she murmured to Lee. Then, gathering her courage, she stood from the piano bench to face her colleagues. "I'm very out of practice," she said softly, which only generated more exclamations of disbelief and questions about her training. Sensing her discomfort, the company president raised his hands for quiet. "I think we've all been treated to something special tonight," he said, "and while I'm sure we all have questions for Ms. Lin, perhaps we should give her some space and continue enjoying our holiday celebrations. The night is still young." This gentle redirection worked. People began drifting back to the bar and the buffet, though many cast glances back at Mei-Lin as if seeing her for the first time. Conversations throughout the room now centered on her performance, with snippets reaching her ears. "Never would've guessed, be wasted. In accounting, if you ask me. Wonder why she stopped playing." The company president stayed by the piano, his curiosity evident despite his call for others to give her space. "I hope you don't mind my asking," he said, lowering his voice, "but that wasn't just good playing. That was world-class. Were you trained professionally?" Mei-Lin hesitated, unused to talking about her past, but the music had already breached her defenses, and somehow, standing in the aftermath of her performance, the old pain seemed less sharp-edged than before. "Yes," she said simply, "in Shanghai. I studied at the conservatory." Recognition dawned in the president's eyes. "Wait a minute. Maylene? Not Maylene Chang? She nodded, surprised that he would know the name. I'm something of a classical music enthusiast, he explained, seeing her expression. There was a young pianist from Shanghai about 20 years ago, won several international competitions, was set for a major career, and then suddenly disappeared from the concert stage. That was you, wasn't it? Maylin looked down at her hands, still a pianist's hands with long fingers and strength hidden in their slender form. There was an accident, she said quietly, a wrist injury. The doctor said I would recover most function, but she trailed off, remembering the devastating prognosis. Not that she couldn't play again, but that she would never play at the level required for an international career. I chose to walk away completely rather than return as a shadow of what I had been. The president shook his head, clearly moved by her story. And you ended up in our accounting department. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it? Before she could respond, Ryan reappeared with a champagne flute, offering it to her with a tentative smile. I really am sorry, he said. When I asked you to play, I was being a jerk. I thought, he had the grace to look ashamed. I thought it would be funny to watch you fumble through chopsticks or something. I never expected that. Maylin accepted the champagne but didn't drink it. Why did you pick me? She asked, curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. Out of everyone here, why single me out? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Because you're always so, I don't know, so perfect. So put together. You never make mistakes on your reports. You never gossip or complain. I guess I wanted to see you be bad at something for once. He laughed awkwardly. That backfired spectacularly. I'm not perfect, Maylin said softly. I'm just careful. As the party continued around her, Maylin found herself the center of attention in a way she hadn't been for decades. People who had worked beside her for years without really seeing her now sought her out, eager to learn more about the quiet accountant with the hidden gift. Maylin woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her bedroom curtains. For a moment she lay still, trying to convince herself that the previous night had been a dream, but the slight soreness in her fingers told her otherwise. After years of disuse, her hands had remembered, but they had not forgotten the physical demands of playing Chopin. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and found it flooded with notifications. Emails from colleagues she barely knew. Text messages from Trisha and a few others who had somehow obtained her personal number. And most surprising of all, a voicemail from the company president himself, asking if she might meet him for coffee that afternoon. Sitting up in bed, Maylin felt a curious mixture of emotions. There was embarrassment at having exposed herself so completely, anxiety about facing her co-workers on Monday. But beneath those familiar fears lurked something else, something that felt strangely like relief. Like finally setting down a heavy suitcase after carrying it for far too long. She made herself a cup of tea and carried it to the living room, where the digital piano sat in the corner. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled away the blue cloth that had covered it for months. The last time she had touched those keys was on a dark winter evening, when memories of her former life had become too persistent to ignore. She had played for less than an hour before covering the instrument again, telling herself it was pointless to reopen old wounds. Now, balancing her tea in one hand, she pressed middle C with a single finger. The sound was thin compared to the grand piano from last night, but it was true. Her phone rang, startling her. The display showed a number she didn't recognize. Hello? She answered cautiously. Maylin? It's Lee from IT. His voice sounded different over the phone, deeper, more hesitant. I hope it's okay that I asked Trisha for your number. I wanted to check if you were all right after last night. Maylin sat on the piano bench, surprised by the concern in his voice. I'm fine, she said automatically, then reconsidered. Actually, I'm not sure what I am right now. Lee chuckled. That's fair. It was quite a night. I didn't plan to play, she found herself explaining. I haven't performed in front of people for almost 20 years. Well, you could have fooled me. There was genuine admiration in his voice. Look, a few of us are getting together for brunch at that cafe near the office. Sunshine Corner? No pressure, but you're welcome to join. I promise no one will make you play the lobby piano. His gentle joke made her smile despite her unease. I don't know. Just think about it, Lee said. We'll be there around 11. Either way, I'll see you Monday. After they hung up, Maylin remained seated at the piano. Her fingers moved to the keys almost of their own accord, playing a simple scale, up and down, up and down. The movement was so familiar, so deeply ingrained that it required no thought at all. Before she could change her mind, she placed both hands on the keys and began to play again. Not Chopin this time, but Bach, a simple prelude she had once used for warming up. The notes were not all perfect. Her timing was sometimes off, but the music was still there, waiting for her. She played for 20 minutes, stopping whenever a passage proved too difficult for her rusty skills. When she finally stood, her decision was made. She would go to the cafe. She would face whatever came next. Sunshine Corner was busier than Mei Lin had expected for a Saturday morning. She spotted Lee immediately, waving from a large table near the window. With him were Tricia, a woman from marketing whose name Mei Lin couldn't recall, and to her surprise, Ryan. "You came." Lee stood as she approached, pulling out a chair for her. "We weren't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Mei Lin admitted, taking the seat. She nodded hello to the others, her eyes briefly meeting Ryan's. He looked away quickly, still embarrassed from the night before. "We ordered a pot of coffee for the table," Tricia said, pushing a clean mug toward Mei Lin. "And don't worry. We've already discussed how we've all worked with you for years and never knew you were basically a concert pianist." "I was," Mei Lin corrected quietly. "I'm not anymore." "Once a pianist, always a pianist," said the marketing woman, Becky. Mei Lin now remembered. "My cousin studied at Juilliard. She always says even if she never played another note, the music would still be part of who she is." Mei Lin found herself nodding. "Your cousin is wise." Ryan cleared his throat. "So I need to apologize again. What I did last night was really unprofessional and mean-spirited. I've been thinking a lot about why I did it." He glanced around the table, then back at Mei Lin. "I think I was jealous in a way. You're so contained. You never seem rattled by anything. I thought it would make me feel better to see you fail at something." His honesty surprised her. "I am rattled by many things," she said softly. "I've just had practice not showing it." The conversation flowed more easily after that. They ordered food, and Mei Lin found herself sharing more about her past than she had with anyone in years. How she had begun playing at 5, how her mother had sacrificed to pay for lessons, how she had won her first competition at 12 and caught the attention of a famous teacher. "So what happened?" Lee finally asked the question they all wanted answered. "If you don't mind talking about it." Mei Lin traced the rim of her coffee cup, considering how much to share. "I was 22. I had just won the international piano competition in Vienna, and doors were opening everywhere. I had a manager, concert bookings for the next 2 years, a recording contract." She paused, remembering that golden time when her future had seemed so certain. "Then I was in a car accident while touring in Italy. Nothing too serious, but my right wrist was badly fractured." "That's terrible," Tricia said, her eyes wide with sympathy. "The doctors told me I would recover about 90% function, which sounds good unless you're a concert pianist. At that level, even a 5% deficit is career-ending." Mei Lin flexed her right hand where the scars had faded to thin silver lines. "I could have continued playing, but not at the level I had been. Not at the level I needed to be." "So you just stopped?" Ryan asked incredulously. "Completely?" Mei Lin nodded. "I couldn't bear to be merely good at something I had once been great at. So I walked away, changed my focus to mathematics, which had always been easy for me. Got a degree in accounting, built a new life. Without music," Lee said quietly. "Without performing," Mei Lin corrected. "The music never really left." She hadn't meant to say that last part aloud, but once spoken, she recognized its truth. Their food arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. As they ate, Mei Lin found herself observing these people, colleagues she had worked alongside for years without truly knowing. They were more complex than she had allowed herself to see, each carrying their own stories and struggles. "The company president called me this morning," she said as they were finishing. "He wants to meet for coffee." "Oh, that's about the charity gala," Tricia said immediately. "He cornered me last night after you left. He wants you to perform." Mei Lin nearly choked on her tea. "Perform? At the gala? That's in 2 months. Don't panic," Lee said, shooting Tricia a look. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." "But you'd be amazing," Becky added. "The gala raises money for music education in schools. Having you play would be perfect." "I'm not ready for that," Mei Lin said, setting down her cup with a shaky hand. "One piece at the holiday party is very different from performing at a formal event." So get ready, Ryan said simply. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised by his direct approach. He shrugged. What? She's clearly still got the talent. She just needs practice. It's not that simple, Maylin began, but Ryan cut her off. Look, I was a jerk to you. I admit that. But I also saw what happened when you played last night. You came alive in a way I've never seen before. It was like watching someone step out of the shadows and into the light. His words landed with unexpected weight. Maylin looked around the table at these people who suddenly saw her, really saw her for the first time. Their faces reflected genuine interest, not the mocking she had feared for so long. 2 months is not much time, she said carefully. So start today, Becky suggested. My cousin still has connections in the music world. She could probably find you a teacher if you wanted to brush up. And the company would cover any expenses, Trisha added eagerly. President Wu was very clear about that. Maylin felt something shifting inside her, a door long closed beginning to crack open. I'll think about it, she promised, which was more than she would have offered just 24 hours ago. After brunch, Lee walked her to the subway station. They strolled in comfortable silence for a block before he spoke. You don't owe them a performance, you know, he said. Not the president, not the company, not anyone. Maylin glanced at him. I know, but I think maybe you owe it to yourself, he continued thoughtfully, to at least consider what it might mean to reconnect with that part of your life. They reached the station entrance and paused. Around them, the city hummed with weekend energy. Shoppers carrying bags, children chasing each other on the sidewalk, street musicians playing for tips. There's a piano in my apartment, Maylin said suddenly. A digital one. I've had it for years, but I rarely play it, Lee smiled. Maybe that could change. Maybe, she agreed, and for the first time in years, the thought didn't fill her with dread. Thank you for inviting me today. It was nice. We should do it again sometime, Lee suggested. No pressure about the gala or playing. Just coffee. Maylin found herself nodding. I'd like that. As she descended into the subway, Maylin felt lighter somehow. The thought of returning to her quiet apartment no longer seemed like a retreat, but rather a return to something waiting to be rediscovered. She found herself eager to sit at her piano again, not to practice for a performance, not yet, but simply to remember what it felt like to make music for no one but herself. The train arrived, its doors sliding open with a soft chime. As Maylin stepped aboard, she realized she was humming softly, the Chopin piece from last night. The music had found its way back to her. Now she just had to decide what to do with it. On Monday morning, Maylin arrived at the office earlier than usual. She hoped to slip quietly into her cubicle before the workday officially began, before she had to face the curious eyes and inevitable questions. The weekend had given her time to think, to play her piano for hours, to remember what it felt like to lose herself in music again. The office was nearly empty at 7:30, just as she'd hoped. A few early birds nodded to her as she passed, but no one mentioned her performance. Perhaps word hadn't spread to every department yet. She had just settled at her desk when a soft knock sounded on her cubicle wall. She looked up to find President Wu standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. I thought I might catch you early, he said, offering her one of the cups. You've always been the first one in, as long as I can remember. Maylin accepted the coffee with a small nod of thanks, surprised that he had noticed her habits. I wanted to speak with you before the day gets busy, he continued, glancing around for somewhere to sit. Finding nowhere, he remained standing, looking slightly awkward despite his expensive suit and usual air of authority. You never returned my call this weekend. I'm sorry, Maylin said. I needed some time to think. Wu nodded as if this made perfect sense. Of course. It must have been quite overwhelming having your talent suddenly exposed like that. He took a sip of his coffee. I've spent the weekend doing some research on you, Ms. Chang. The use of her full name, her performance name, made Maylin stiffen slightly. Your career was truly remarkable, even if it was cut short, Wu continued. 3 international competitions by the age of 22. Performances with the Shanghai Symphony, the Vienna Philharmonic. Reviews that called you the most promising pianist of your generation. That was a long time ago, Maylin said quietly. 18 years, Wu agreed. And then you disappeared completely from the music world. No farewell concert, no teaching position, nothing, just gone. He leaned against the cubicle wall. And now I find you've been working in our accounting department for the past 7 years, and no one, including me, had any idea who you really were. Mei Lin set down her coffee carefully. I never lied on my application. Mei-Lin Chang is my name. My accounting degree and work experience are real. I never suggested otherwise, Wu said quickly. I'm not questioning your qualifications or integrity. I'm just fascinated by your journey. He paused, studying her face. And I'm wondering if perhaps it's time for that journey to take another turn. Here it was, the conversation Trisha had warned her about. Mei-Lin took a deep breath. You want me to play at the charity gala? Wu's face brightened. Yes, it would be perfect. The gala supports music education in underfunded schools. Having someone of your caliber perform, someone who began as a child, prodigy in Shanghai and rose to international, I acclaim it would add so much meaning to the event. I haven't performed seriously in nearly 2 decades, Mei-Lin reminded him. One holiday party piece doesn't change that, which is why the company would provide whatever you need to prepare, Wu said eagerly. Practice time, a coach, a proper piano. We could reduce your workload temporarily so you'd have time to get ready. The offer was generous, unexpectedly so. Mei-Lin found herself speechless for a moment. Wu seemed to take her silence as hesitation rather than surprise. There would be compensation, of course, beyond your regular salary. And no repercussions if you decide it's not something you want to do. Your job here is secure regardless. May I ask why this matters so much to you? Mei-Lin finally said. You could hire a professional pianist for the gala. There are many in the city who perform regularly. Wu set his coffee down and folded his arms, considering her question. 2 reasons. First, the purely practical one. Having an employee with your remarkable background perform would create exactly the kind of story that attracts donors and press coverage. It would make the gala memorable. Mei-Lin nodded. This made sense from a business perspective. But the second reason, Wu continued more softly, is more personal. My mother was a pianist, not at your level, but she played beautifully. She taught piano to support our family after my father died. When I heard you play at the party, I saw in you what I often saw in her when she played. That complete transformation, that connection to something beyond the everyday world. He smiled slightly. I think talent like yours shouldn't remain hidden. Not if there's any way to share it again. His sincerity surprised her. In 7 years, she had never had a personal conversation with President Wu. He had always been a distant figure giving speeches at company meetings, occasionally nodding to her in the hallway but never really seeing her. Now he stood in her cubicle, sharing memories of his mother and looking at her with genuine respect. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I need time to think, to practice privately first, to see if I can even play at that level anymore. Of course, Wu said, clearly pleased she hadn't refused outright. Take 2 weeks. Use the baby grand in the conference center. No one books that room before 9 or after 5. Then let me know your decision. He picked up his coffee cup. And Mei-Lin, thank you for considering it. As he walked away, Mei-Lin sat very still, her mind racing. 2 weeks to decide if she was ready to step back into a world she had left behind so completely. 2 weeks to see if her hands, her heart, her spirit were ready to make music publicly again. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word of her performance had indeed spread throughout the office. Colleagues who had never spoken to her before stopped by her desk to express their amazement. The attention was uncomfortable but not entirely unwelcome. There was something freeing about being seen, truly seen, after years of carefully cultivated invisibility. At lunch, Lee appeared at her cubicle with a paper bag from the deli across the street. Thought you might want to avoid the cafeteria today, he said with a knowing smile. Too many admirers. Mei-Lin found herself smiling back. Thank you. That was thoughtful. They ate at her desk, talking about ordinary things. A new restaurant Lee had tried over the weekend, the unseasonably warm weather, an upcoming system upgrade he was preparing for. Not once did he mention the piano or her meeting with President Wu, which she was certain he knew about through the office grapevine. It was only as he was gathering the sandwich wrappers that he said, Whatever you decide about the gala, it's your choice. No one else's. Mei-Lin looked up at him, struck by how he seemed to understand what she needed to hear. President Wu made a very convincing case, Lee nodded. He's good at that. It's why he runs the company. But this isn't about spreadsheets or profit margins. This is about your life. A part of my life I closed the door on a long time ago, Mei-Lin reminded him. Doors can be reopened, Lee said simply, or you can choose to keep them closed. Either way, your choice. After he left, Mei Lin found herself dwelling on his words. Your choice. How long had it been since she had made a true choice about music? The accident had taken choice away. Her decision to abandon performing completely had felt necessary at the time, the only way to cope with losing her dream. But now, for the first time in 18 years, she had a real choice to make. When the workday ended, instead of heading straight home as she usually did, Mei Lin found herself walking toward the company's conference center. The large room was empty, just as Wu had promised. And there in the corner stood the baby grand piano, the same one she had played 3 nights ago, the instrument that had reawakened something she had thought long dormant. She set down her purse and coat on a nearby chair and approached the piano slowly. Without the audience, without the pressure of watching eyes, she sat at the bench and placed her hands on the keys. For the next hour, Mei Lin played, scales and arpeggios at first, the building blocks she had once practiced for hours each day. Her fingers were stiff, her technique rusty. She made mistakes she would never have made in her youth. But beneath the imperfections, she could feel the foundation was still there, waiting to be rebuilt. She was so absorbed in her playing that she didn't notice the door opening, didn't realize anyone had entered until she heard soft applause at the end of a Debussy piece. Startled, she turned to find the evening custodian standing near the door, his cleaning cart beside him. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to interrupt. I've never heard anyone play like that before. Mei Lin should have been embarrassed. She had made at least a dozen noticeable errors in the piece, but instead, she found herself smiling. Thank you. I'm very out of practice, the man shook his head in wonder. If that's out of practice, I can't imagine what in practice sounds like. He gestured around the empty room. You can keep going. I'll clean the other rooms first and come back later. After he left, Mei Lin remained at the piano, thinking about his reaction. He had heard all the flaws in her playing, yet still found beauty in it. Perhaps perfection wasn't the only thing that mattered. Perhaps there was value in the music itself, even when imperfectly expressed. She played for another hour, losing track of time as she worked through pieces she had once known by heart. When she finally gathered her things to leave, her fingers were sore, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. On her way out, she passed the custodian again. He was polishing the brass fixtures in the lobby, humming softly to himself. With a start, Mei Lin recognized the tune. It was the Debussy piece she had been playing earlier. You have a good ear, she said, pausing beside him. He looked up, slightly embarrassed. My grandmother loved classical music. She used to play records while she cleaned. He hesitated, then added, You remind me of her when you play. She used to say music wasn't just about the notes. It was about the feeling behind them. Mei Lin felt something catch in her throat. Your grandmother was wise. As she walked home through the evening streets, Mei Lin found herself thinking about all the people who had entered her life in the past few days. Not as colleagues or acquaintances, but as real connections. Lee with his quiet support, Trisha with her enthusiastic encouragement, President Wu with his memories of his mother, even Ryan, whose cruel joke had inadvertently opened a door she had kept locked for years, and now the custodian who had heard beauty in her imperfect playing. For so long she had defined herself by what she had lost: the flawless technique, the promising career, the identity as a rising star. She had believed that without perfection, music held no place for her. But perhaps there was another way to think about it. Perhaps music wasn't something you possessed or achieved, but rather something you shared, imperfections and all. 2 months passed in a blur of practice sessions, rediscovered passion and unexpected connections. Mei Lin had said yes to performing at the charity gala, a decision that had transformed her daily routine and gradually, her entire outlook on life. She now spent every morning before work at the conference room piano, her fingers growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. After work, 3 evenings a week, she met with Dr. Chen, a retired piano professor President Wu had introduced her to. The elderly teacher had approached their first lesson with polite skepticism, but by the end of their initial hour together, his eyes had shone with genuine excitement. Your technique needs refinement after so many years away, he had told her honestly, but the musicality, that rare ability to make the piano sing, that has only deepened with time. Tonight was the night of the gala. Maylin stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, hardly recognizing herself. Gone was the plain, forgettable accountant who blended into the background. In her place stood a woman in a deep blue evening gown, her hair swept up elegantly, a subtle confidence in her posture that hadn't been there 2 months ago. Her phone chimed with a text message from Lee. "Car's outside whenever you're ready. No rush." Lee had surprised her by offering to be her +1 for the evening. "So you'll have at least one friendly face in the crowd," he'd said. Their friendship had grown steadily over the past weeks, built on quiet lunches and occasional weekend walks where they talked about everything and nothing. Maylin took one last look in the mirror, picked up her small evening bag and headed downstairs. Lee waited beside a hired car, dressed in a well-fitted suit she'd never seen him wear before. When he caught sight of her, his eyes widened appreciatively. "You look," he seemed to search for the right word, "luminous." Maylin felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The drive to the hotel where the gala was being held passed in comfortable conversation, Lee sensing her nervous energy and doing his best to distract her with stories from his college days when he'd played in a terrible garage band. "So you understand music?" Maylin said. Surprised by this new piece of information, Lee laughed. "I understand trying to make music. There's a big difference." He glanced at her, suddenly serious. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Maylin considered the question. "Yes, but not in the way I expected to be." She looked out at the city lights flashing past. "I used to get physically ill before performances, shaking hands, upset stomach, cold sweats. But tonight I'm nervous in a different way. I'm worried I won't be able to communicate what the music means to me." "I think that's exactly what makes you an artist, rather than just a technician," Lee said quietly. They arrived at the Grand Windsor Hotel, the same venue where the holiday party had been held 2 months earlier. Tonight, however, the hotel had been transformed. The ballroom glittered with elegant decorations, round tables with crisp white linens and centerpieces of blue and silver flowers. A stage had been set up at the front of the room, and in its center stood a magnificent concert grand piano. The event coordinator spotted Maylin immediately and rushed over. "Ms. Chang, we've been waiting for you. The pianist's room is ready backstage. You'll have about 40 minutes before your performance." Maylin turned to Lee, suddenly reluctant to be separated from him. "I'll be right there in the front," he promised, sensing her hesitation. "Table 3 with President Wu and the other executives. You can't miss me, I'll be the one grinning like a fool." His easy confidence made her smile. With a small nod, she followed the coordinator through a side door to a private room set up specifically for her. A small dressing area with a mirror, comfortable chair, water, and a digital keyboard for last-minute practice. "Is there anything else you need?" the coordinator asked. Maylin shook her head. "This is perfect, thank you." Left alone, Maylin sat at the keyboard and ran through a few warm-up exercises. Her hands felt good tonight, relaxed but precise. She had chosen her program carefully. Debussy's Clair de Lune to start, followed by Bach's Prelude in C major, and ending with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece that had started this entire journey. She was midway through a passage from the Bach when a knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting the event coordinator again. Instead, a small group entered, Trisha, Becky, and Ryan, all dressed in their gala best. "We're not supposed to be back here," Trisha confessed immediately, "but we bribed one of the servers to tell us where you were." "We just wanted to wish you good luck," Becky added, "before you go out there and blow everyone away." Ryan hung back slightly, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I brought you something," he said, stepping forward with a small, flat package wrapped in silver paper. "Sort of a thank you for not hating me after I was a jerk gift." Maylin accepted the package with surprise. "You didn't need to." "I did," he interrupted. "Just open it." She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a framed photograph. It showed her at the holiday party piano, caught in profile at a moment of complete absorption in the music. Her eyes were closed, her face transformed by an expression of such pure joy that Maylin hardly recognized herself. "Trisha took it on her phone that night," Ryan explained. "I had it professionally printed. I thought, maybe it could remind you who you really are, if you ever start to forget again." Maylin stared at the image, deeply moved by the unexpected thoughtfulness from someone she had once barely noticed. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means a great deal to me." They wished her luck once more and slipped out, leaving Mei Lin alone again with her thoughts and the beautiful photograph. The minutes ticked by quickly. Soon the event coordinator returned to escort her to the wings of the stage. Through a gap in the curtains, Mei Lin could see the ballroom now filled with elegantly dressed donors, community leaders, and her colleagues from work. President Wu was at the microphone, introducing her with obvious pride. "And so it is my extraordinary pleasure to introduce a pianist whose journey exemplifies exactly why music education matters so deeply. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our own Mei Lin Chang." The audience applauded as Mei Lin stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, the faces before her a blur. She bowed slightly, then took her seat at the piano. For a moment she sat perfectly still, gathering herself. She spotted Lee in the front row just as he'd promised, his encouraging smile a beacon in the sea of faces. Next to him was Dr. Chen, her teacher, nodding slightly as if to say, "You're ready." Mei Lin placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Claire de Lune floated into the silent room, delicate as moonlight on water. She felt the familiar sensation of falling into the music, of becoming a channel through which Debussy's genius could speak to the present. Her technique wasn't flawless, she knew that. There were moments when her fingers didn't move as quickly as they once had, when a note didn't sing quite as she intended. But the music itself carried her forward, and she surrendered to it completely. When she finished the Debussy, the audience's applause was immediate and warm. Mei Lin moved directly into the Bach, letting its mathematical precision and spiritual depth wash through her. By the time she reached the Chopin, she was no longer thinking about technique or the audience or even herself. She was simply living inside the music, telling its story through her hands. The final notes of the ballade faded away. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence in the ballroom. Then the audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the space. Mei Lin stood somewhat dazed and bowed deeply. As she straightened, she caught sight of President Wu wiping a tear from his eye. Behind him, her colleagues from accounting were cheering wildly. And Lee was looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. When she returned to her table after the performance, she was immediately surrounded by people offering congratulations, asking questions, expressing amazement. But it was the custodian from the conference center who gave her the comment she would remember most clearly. "My grandmother would have loved that," he said simply, having traded his usual uniform for a rented tuxedo to attend the gala. "She always said music should make you feel something, and tonight I felt everything." Later, as the evening wound down, Mei Lin found herself standing on the hotel's terrace with Lee, looking out at the city lights. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. "Dr. Chen thinks I should give a small recital next month," Mei Lin replied. "Nothing too ambitious, just a step back into the music world." "And what do you think?" Mei Lin considered the question. 2 months ago, the thought of performing again professionally would have terrified her. Now, after tonight, it felt like a door opening to a future she had thought forever closed. "I think I'd like to try," she said, "not to recapture what I was before. I'm not that young pianist anymore, and I don't want to be. But I think there's still music in me that wants to be shared." Lee smiled, reaching for her hand. "I never doubted it for a minute. I also think," Mei Lin added carefully, "that I'd like to keep my job at Wellington and Partners. At least part-time." "Really? Even after tonight's triumph?" Mei Lin nodded. "I've learned something important these past 2 months. Being a concert pianist isn't the only way to have music in my life, and being an accountant isn't something I need to hide behind. Both can be part of who I am." As if to emphasize her point, music drifted through the open doors from the ballroom, where the band was playing the final songs of the evening. "Would you like to dance?" Lee asked, offering his hand. "I'd love to," Mei Lin replied, stepping into his arms. As they moved slowly across the terrace, Mei Lin thought about the strange, wonderful journey that had brought her to this moment. How a cruel joke had become the catalyst for rediscovering a part of herself she had locked away. How colleagues she had barely noticed had become friends who supported and championed her. How music, which she had once pursued with single-minded perfectionism, had returned to her life not as a demanding master, but as a cherished companion. The first note she had played on that piano 2 months ago had indeed astonished everyone. But the most astonished person of all had been herself, not by the talent she had kept hidden, but by the discovery that there were second acts in life, new beginnings hidden inside endings, and music waiting to be played in the most unexpected places.